What is going on, guys? We are back playing some more Surviving with Botania, and today we're going to be setting up an infinite mana generating tree farm. So the main goal for today's episode is to get away from this manual Endoflame mana generation setup that we've got running right here, which is being a little bit obnoxious. It's always super loud, but that's totally besides the point. Now this is where most people will start out when it comes to mana generation in Botania, because it's really cheap and easy to get set up early on, and should give you a sufficient amount of mana to make some of your first builds, which it's done for us and that's been great. But it's got two glaring flaws. The first one is that the Endoflames are actually really bad at generating mana. You do not get much from these at all, even when you are constantly supplying burnable fuel, like I'm clearly doing right now. And the second one is that it's really annoying to constantly supply burnable fuel. Obviously, you got to keep dumping stuff in there, and even if you're putting a lot in there at any given time, you're still having to go and get that burnable fuel at some point. So in my case, that means either chopping down trees to make charcoal or going on extended mining trips to try and find coal. So obviously this is extremely annoying, and today we will be setting up a completely autonomous mana generation setup that is self-sufficient, and once we've set it up, we can just leave it to generate all the mana we could possibly need, and then we get to do the fun stuff with that mana instead of actually having to worry about generating the mana itself. Now, before we get into the specific requirements for today's setup, I do want to say that you need the portal to Alfheim open and ready to go if you're planning on making this build, because one of the most important components to this entire setup has crafting materials that can only be acquired through Elven trade, which if you don't know, is tossing a certain block through the Elven portal and getting back its Elven equivalent. And so if you don't have this set up, unfortunately, you're not going to be able to do that, so I would recommend you go check out last episode, where we cover how to set this up very easily early on, and then once you've done that, you can pop back over here and start doing some actual crafting. As for those of you that have the portal to Alfheim open and you're all ready to go, well, here are the requirements for today's episode. There's definitely a lot of them because there's a lot of stuff we need for this, but you can feel free to pause the video if you want to make sure that you have everything you need to follow along with today's episode. And we should be good to grab all this stuff out and start the quite lengthy crafting process to get everything set up for today. Okay, so the crafting should be done for today's episode, and there was definitely a lot of it. We've got a completely full inventory right now, so there's a lot of stuff for us to work with, which means we should probably get started. And we're going to go through this step by step, so hopefully it makes sense as you're setting it up. And the first thing we need to deal with is actually placing down the sapling that's going to grow into the tree that will then be harvested. So I am just going to put down some dirt right here where the sapling is going to go, and you can put this down wherever. It's not really going to be in the center of the setup, so I definitely wouldn't base where your setup's going to go right off of this piece of dirt, but I will say that you're going to want to make sure that it's having at least 7 blocks above it to work with. It's going to need 6 of those as air, and then 1 of those as a mana burst stopper, which we'll be going over later. So as long as you got that room and some area around it to work with, you should be good. The next thing that we're going to do is worry about how we are actually going to plant that sapling automatically. So we're going to come over 3 and then up 2, and we're going to place down another block of dirt, and then we are going to place down our floating Ranuncarpus right on top of that block of dirt. Now the Ranuncarpus is going to place down blocks that are dropped in an area around it, and so this will be great for replanting our sapling. The important thing though is the Ranuncarpus can only place blocks on top of blocks that it's on top of. So that might sound a little bit weird, but basically what it means is this thing is on top of a dirt block right now. So whenever it goes to place blocks, it'll only be able to put them down on top of other dirt blocks in its range. So that's why you want to make sure that you don't have additional dirt blocks outside of this one right here anywhere in its working area. Otherwise, you're going to be putting saplings down in places that you don't really want them to be, but you got to make sure that this is on top of dirt. Once you have that, this will be good to plant saplings here whenever they're dropped. And if we want to test it out to make sure, well, then we can easily just toss one down right here. And there we go. So the next step we need to go over is going to be the dropper for the saplings that the Ranuncarpus is then going to pick up and be planting right over here. So what we're going to do is come over 2, and then we're going to build up 1 block on each of these right here, and we're going to make the very simple pressure plate open crate setup. So we're just going to place down the pressure plate, we're going to put down the open crate right on top of it, put down a hopper right here, we're going to run the redstone right like this, coming up in the back here, and there we go. So if we take a quick look just to make sure this works, well, there we go. The sapling comes out and 1 sits here. Now the reason this is important is because we need to make sure that there is always a sapling available for the Ranuncarpus to pick up in case it needs to replant this. We don't want potential downtime where there's no sapling to be replanted and this is just an empty dirt block. So now the next step is going to be collecting all the items when the tree is eventually cut down, and this is going to be things like sticks, apples, oak wood, and finally the saplings, which are going to be put into this hopper right here. So we're going to use a floating hopper hawk for that, and it's a little bit buggy when we look at it with the Manaseer's monocle. It kind of disappears a bit, but as you can see right now, what's happening is every once in a while the floating hopper hawk is picking up the sapling and it's putting it back in here. Now the first thing that we should probably do is indicate that we want saplings to go in here, so we're just going to use an item frame, and then we should grab one of these saplings really quick, place it in the item frame, and now the hopper hawk will only place saplings in here, so this is never going to get backed up by some other random block it's collecting. But then we need to grab out a boreal seed, and we're going to use that on the floating hopper hawk. And if you don't know what these do, they're going to turn what is normally dirt under the hopper hawk in the floating form into podzol. And this is going to give a slight delay in this hopper hawk interacting with any blocks in the world. So we click it on there, you can see that the dirt converts to podzol, or the grass converts. And now what'll happen is if we break this, the Ranuncarpus should have priority over the hopper hawk to plant the sapling before this picks it up. Now this is extremely important to the setup because we are going to be consuming a lot of the leaves that are spawned with these trees for mana, and we'll be going over that later, and only a few of them are actually going to despawn and potentially drop saplings. And if we want this system to be totally autonomous and self-sufficient, we need to make sure that it is constantly supplied with enough saplings that it never runs out. Otherwise, the entire thing's going to stop. So making sure that none of these potentially despawn and get wasted is very important to the setup. Now that we have those being collected, we need to deal with all the other drops that are going to be coming from the trees that we're cutting down. So we're going to put a chest down right here, and then we're just going to put item frames on this for both apples and sticks. Doesn't matter where you put the item frames, but I'm going to put one here, and I think we should be able to put one right over here, and I'm accidentally picking up all these saplings. And you know what, we can probably grab out these saplings because they're just going to be making a lot of noise while we're setting this up. but we'll put apples in this item frame, and then we'll toss sticks in this one. So this chest right here is just going to be for those miscellaneous drops that are not actually relevant to this whole mana generation setup. You can do whatever you want with these. You can save them, you can void them, doesn't really matter. I'm just going to save them in here because we shouldn't get that many of them that it's going to be an issue. And maybe we can eventually use the apples later for some other mana generation. Who knows? The next thing we're going to do though is grab out a furnace and put it down directly next to the floating hopper hawk. So let's see if I can properly click that on there with the glitchy visuals. And there we go. So we have the furnace to the other side of this hopper hawk, and this is going to be where we put the oak wood. So another item frame, an oak log going to be going in here. So we'll put the item frame down here, put the log on the back there. And this is where the setup gets a little bit more complicated, and you have the option of doing one of two things. So in the setup today, we are going to be converting the oak logs into charcoal, using some oak logs to cook them down, and some oak logs to obviously be converted into that charcoal, and then consuming those with endo flames to generate additional mana. Keep in mind that those endo flames will not be the main source of mana generation for this setup, so if you choose to not do this, you will still have a net positive mana gain from this, and you can just put a chest down right over here where this furnace is and simply collect the wood. If you'd like to have wood as a secondary output, that is a totally fine option. I personally am not looking to have a ton of logs collecting over here in a chest. I don't really have a ton of uses for them right now, so instead I'd rather have more mana, and that's why we end up here. So what we're going to do is put down an additional floating hopper hawk on top of this furnace, and we're going to again use a boreal seed on it. So I just need to grab out some blocks so that I can get up there, and we're going to put it down directly on top of the furnace, and then we're going to use a boreal seed on it to make the dirt into podzol. Now this whole thing is important because basically we need to have both logs going in here to be cooked down into charcoal and also to do the cooking. And oh my gosh, of course, the tree grows in the middle of the episode. You know what? I'm just going to cut this down right now because I do not want to have to deal with maneuvering around this thing. Okay, so the tree is taken care of, but obviously that means that we have sufficient room in here for it to grow. I guess that's a good thing. But either way, as I was saying, the important thing for this furnace is that we are going to have logs coming in to be cooked down into charcoal and also to do the cooking. And so basically, if we have a hopper hawk on top of this, it's going to act like a hopper on top of the furnace, and it's going to input the logs into the smeltable slot. If we have the hopper hawk inputting on the side here, it's going to input the logs into the fuel slot. Now, I believe when I did testing that the top hopper hawk had priority, but from any reading in Botania, if you look at the modulating delay, you would know that there is no way to determine which one of these will have priority if they're the same flower and they also have the same kind of dirt under them. They both have podzol, so they both have a minimal delay on them, and they're collecting the same exact block and putting it into the same exact place. So I guess if we want to test it out, all we got to do is drop some oak logs here and we can see which one they get inserted into. So in this one, they get inserted into the bottom. That is totally fine. If it gets inserted into the top for you, that's also fine. All you're going to want to do is preload this with a stack of oak logs if you wanted to immediately start using the oak logs to make charcoal. Otherwise, you're going to have to wait for your setup to collect an entire stack and fill up one section before it starts loading the rest. And so what's going to happen here is every time a tree gets cut down, it's going to put some of them into the top, and then eventually it'll refill whatever it uses in the bottom, then go back to filling the top. So you will always have pretty much a stack in the bottom here, ready to cook down whatever goes into the top. And so then whenever it gets a couple, it'll put them in here, and every single tree will probably net you maybe 3 to 4 charcoal, because some of it is going to then be used to actually cook down the logs into charcoal. So now all we need to do is set up again the dropper setup for this. So that's going to be another pressure plate, open crate with a hopper. So we're just going to put that right over here, open crate right on top of that, hopper coming down from below this, and then doing the redstone and just running it right up the side here. So this should be good, and then all we're going to do is grab out our endo flames, and I'm just going to put them down right over here. Doesn't really matter where you put them down as long as they're in range of whatever drops on this pressure plate. And the important thing that we're going to do with these is use infestation spores. So we're going to click one on each of these, and this will make it into mycelium. And this one is going to be even more of a delay than the podzol on these hopper hawks. And this is again important because what's going to happen here is when the tree gets broken, it's going to obviously drop logs all over the place. They're going to get spit out right over here when we start making the setup that breaks them. And what's important is we want the hopper hawks to pick stuff up that is burnable, in this case the logs, even the sticks, before these endo flames will. Now, not every single block will end up in range of these endo flames, but some will, and so we'll lose efficiency if any of them get picked up. And the reason that we're not going to have these on the same delay using podzol as these hopper hawks is because generating flora gets priority over functional flora when they have the same delay and both want the same blocks. So we just need to make sure that these have the highest delay of anything in the system. And so nothing else is going to be picking up charcoal because these are not going to have anywhere to put it because everything's going to have an item frame on it. So it'll be left for the endo flames. So that's how that setup's going to work and how we make sure we are going to get our maximum efficiency out of all the burnable fuel that we're using. And now it's time to finish off this setup with probably the most important and complex part of it, and that is going to be storing the mana and using some of it to break the tree. So we're going to put down a mana spreader right over here. We're going to have a mana pool right in front of it, and we can point it directly at this if we want. Doesn't matter, it should fire in there anyway. But then we are going to come and put down a pulse mana spreader right next to this mana pool. Now this pulse mana spreader is going to be the mana spreader that does the breaking of the tree, and we're going to put on it a composite mana lens that is Boar Warp. Now the order that you put these mana lenses together is critical. It needs to be a Boar Warp lens. It needs to be green, which means you needed to have the Boar lens on top of the Warp lens when you did the crafting recipe, just like I did in the beginning of the video. Otherwise, it's not going to work properly. Once you have that, we're going to click it on here, and then we are going to put down 2 blocks up from this, a force relay. So we're going to build up just like this, put down a force relay right here, and this should be firing directly into it. But if we want to make sure that it is, we can just shift right click on this and click it onto the force relay. And basically the force relay is going to allow the pulse that comes out of here to teleport to a block. So we're going to right click on the force relay, and then we are going to right click on this dirt. So what will happen is this pulse mana spreader, when it gets a redstone signal, will fire off a mana pulse from this mana pool into this force relay, which will then shoot it all the way over to this dirt block and start shooting it up. And that's what's going to break the tree because it's a Boar lens from this. And the next thing we need to deal with is coming up from this dirt block and placing down a mana pool right up 7 blocks above this. So we're going to put it down right here. And that means, just to visualize it, that we have 1, 2, 3, and then it would be 4, 5, 6 blocks on top of the dirt block. And then the 7th block is the mana pool. Now, the reason this is important is not to recollect the mana that's being fired. In old setups, you used to be able to do that, but I believe it was at least a nerf, or maybe it was a bug and they fixed it. But now the Boar Warp lens is no longer going to have mana collect in that mana pool, because after you warp a pulse of mana, it is no longer going to be collectible. So in this case, the mana is just gone, but we still need a block there that cannot be broken by the Boar mana pulse. So if we just had a regular block there and it fired off, it would break it. And so we obviously don't want it breaking through the ceiling in our base or anything like that. So we just put down a very cheap mana pool right up there. And all that's going to do is stop the pulse that comes out of here so it doesn't break anything after the tree, because it still will have a little bit of strength left in it when it gets up there. Now we need to deal with the redstone portion of this though. How are we going to get a redstone signal every time the tree grows? And in pretty much all my series, you guys know I love this setup right here. So basically, when you have a sapling placed down here, it is not going to transmit a redstone signal, but when it grows, it is a solid block. It will transmit the signal being pushed in by the repeater, and this will then give off a pulse. It's only going to give a single one, even though we're going to have a continuous stream until it's broken, and that's what's going to tell our setup that the tree is there and it's ready to be collected. Now though, we have the tree collected, but we've got a bunch of leaves, and so we're going to use the floating munch dew, and we're going to put it down right next to this force relay. We want to make sure that it's 2 blocks off the ground here, and the munch dew is going to consume all the leaves at its level or higher in its range, and turn those into mana. Now this is going to be the main mana generator for the setup, so we just want to make sure that this is bound to the correct mana spreader. So we want it to be bound to this one. Same with these endo flames, both should be bound to this mana spreader right here, not this one. We want them to deposit in this mana pool where there will be a net gain, but basically this is going to consume majority of leaves that grow on a tree. There's going to be about 1 level of leaves left on the tree if this is ready to consume it that will be allowed to despawn and attempt to generate saplings. The reason this is going to work though is because the munch dew has a cooldown period once it consumes leaves, and so that's about 80 seconds, which means that if we have a tree grow within 80 seconds of the prior tree growing, well then all the leaves will be allowed to despawn up until this munch dew is ready to eat again. And so this actually works out perfectly because we're going to grow these trees pretty quick, and it's going to allow saplings to actually build up even though we're consuming majority of the leaves that are available on the trees when they grow and the munch dew is ready. So this is again an easy way for the munch dew to get nerfed a little bit so it just can't continuously eat all the leaves that it needs, but it allows us to place it a little bit lower than otherwise. If you do run into issues with maintaining saplings though, just move it up 1 level and you'll still get plenty of mana, there'll still be plenty of leaves to eat, but you'll end up having 2 rows of leaves that aren't going to end up getting consumed, and then you should have absolutely 0 issue with saplings altogether. The last thing that we are going to do is speed up the growth of our tree, because on its own the trees grow pretty slow and we only have 1 in here, so we need to speed it up. So we're going to put down tons and tons of floating agricarnations. I'm going to do 8 of these right over here, and these are going to essentially every couple seconds use mana to apply a bone meal effect to some crop in its area. So if we have a sapling down here, we'll actually see that they apply bone meal effects to it at the cost of a little bit of mana. So these are all bound to this mana pool. We want to make sure that these hopper hawks are also bound to this mana pool, because occasionally with this boar warp lens, things will get chucked out way over here. So we need to make sure those can pick them up. And we want to make sure the munch dew, again, bound correctly, endo flames bound correctly. And this Ranuncarpus does not need to be bound to a mana pool. If it's bound to a mana pool, it'll expend mana to have a slightly larger range, but that actually doesn't matter for us. It's got plenty of range as it is, so we don't want to waste any amount of mana doing that. We'll just leave it unbound. And I think that should be pretty much everything good to go for the setup, other than tossing the saplings in and letting it start to work. So I will toss them in this right here. We'll allow them to drop. It'll plant them, and then we'll wait and see a tree actually grow. Okay, so the tree has grown. We got to see it completely in action and everything working. I will say that I was wondering why it was taking a while initially. I realized that it's going to be pretty slow your first time around unless you choose to jumpstart the system with a little bit of mana. So I just chucked a couple pieces of oak logs into the furnace so the endo flames could consume some charcoal, because you do need to give at least a little bit of mana to the agricarnations, and we can see again another tree grew. All the stuff is going to get picked up, and a perfect example now that there are plenty of leaves to despawn because the munch dew can't fully consume more of them yet. So we should have no issue with maintaining saplings with this, and there's already another sapling ready to be grown. So you may actually find out that maybe you need to reduce the number of agricarnations in your setup because it's growing too fast, but that's totally up to you. We can see everything is working flawlessly here, and again, there are some adjustments you can make if you want to save the oak wood, if you want to do anything else with this, reduce the number of agricarnations, all that good stuff, whatever you want to do with the apples, but you can see again the munch dew is ready to eat, and that is what's going to fire off tons and tons of mana into our mana pool there. But I think that's going to be it for today, guys. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe so you never miss out on a future one, as they're coming out every Monday and Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and I will talk to you guys later.